Welcome to the Beneath the Sandalwood Tree channel. Today's story is about a case that began like so many others, a Facebook page pleading for help. In Denpasar, Bali, a simple message went viral online. Find Engeline, Bali's missing child. It was a plea for a 7-year-old girl who had run away from her home on Sedap Malam Street. But you and I know there's more than meets the eye in a search. It wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't a runaway. It was a lie covered in layers of dust and dirt. Because on June 10th, 2015, in her own backyard, under a banana tree, a decomposing body was found, and the stench was a truth that could no longer be hidden. Behind the faces scattered across Facebook pages and media, Engeline has her own story, which began on May 19, 2007, at a simple clinic in Canggu. His parents' names are Hamida and Ahmad Roshidi, and he is the second of 3 siblings from a fragile and broken family. However, fate led her to Sedap Malam Street in Denpasar and not into the arms of her biological parents. There, behind a door of a seemingly normal house, a dark story began, and the life of a little girl that should have been full of laughter and happiness instead became a grim tale. In this world, there are people who struggle to survive, and there are people who pursue luxury. Hamida, Engeline's biological mother, is a domestic worker, a woman who migrated to Bali at the age of 15 from her hometown, Banyuwangi. On the island of Bali, she met Ahmad Roshidi, a construction worker, and they started a family, a fragile family that eventually fell apart. It's a story that's all too familiar, a story about people trapped in difficult lives. However, there was one thing they didn't expect. Their difficult lives would lead their daughter into the arms of death, hidden behind wealth and false promises. It is said that money is the root of all evil, and in this case, it was the seed planted long before the tragedy occurred. Hamida, who couldn't afford the delivery costs, was told about a woman named Marguerite who would settle the debt and adopt her baby. Marguerite spent 1.8 million rupees, a small portion of her money, and in return, she took the baby, who hadn't even been named yet, just 3 days after he was born. The child never saw her biological parents again. Even stranger, the name Engeline was given by Marguerite, not by her biological parents. The adoption, as we know, was never approved in court. It was merely a unilateral agreement signed before a notary, with Marguerite's husband, Douglas, choosing not to be involved. It was a transaction, not an adoption, a purchase that would be very expensive for a little girl who had no choice. It was a cold and cruel beginning to a story that never had a happy ending. The gateway to this tragedy is not just a house on Sedap Malam Street, but a legal document. In the adoption agreement, there were clauses written in cold ink and without emotion. Engeline would become Marguerite's heir later on, but in return, any inheritance rights from her biological family would be revoked. If Engeline passed away, the inheritance rights would pass to Marguerite's heirs. It wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a false promise that bound a little girl's life to a deal tainted by money and greed, stripping her of all her rights in this world. And the most surprising thing is, it was an agreement containing a clause about his death long before he lost his life. hear a lot of stuff from people. She was treated like family, they added. They described her as a happy child who spoke English to her new mother. She even had a father, Douglas, who cherished her, as well as 2 elder sisters, Yvonne and Christina. The family's life appeared to be a typical one from the outside when they went from Pekanbaru to Bekasi and then to Bali. However, there is always a villain in a good story, and every villain requires a moment to strike. When Engeline's adopted father Douglas passed away on September 17, 2008, that day arrived. He was the light in a house on the verge of darkness, the protection. The facade of a happy family started to fall apart when he left, leaving a young girl helpless and stuck with a woman who had recently buried the only person she might have ever truly loved. The end was just getting started. When the shield fell, the remnants of the fairy tale vanished. With Douglas in the ground, the whole charade collapsed and the brutal truth crept out of the shadows. Engeline is no longer the cheerful, English-speaking child she once was. She became a girl with a thin body, as evidenced by photos and her teacher's testimonies. A girl who endured physical and mental abuse behind closed doors. He lived in a decaying mansion, a house filled with foul-smelling chicken coops, where wealth couldn't mask the pain, and where evil lurked behind a perfect facade. It wasn't a house, it was a prison, and inside, a little girl was awaiting her cruel fate. When we look at photos of a cheerful little girl, we don't want to imagine the hidden suffering. However, behind the door of the house filled with chicken coops, Engeline was forced into slavery. Her daily tasks include washing, mopping, cleaning, and feeding the dozens of animals in his home. She had to work until late at night and often fell asleep outside. If she forgets to do it, she will receive a cruel punishment from her foster mother. Her teacher even remembered how Engeline came to school with smelly hair full of chicken droppings, which they had to clean themselves. The testimony tells a story more horrifying than words can describe. A grim picture of a little girl treated worse than an animal in her own home. In this story, there's one thing we can't forget. A child who can't escape their destiny. At Sianor State Elementary School 12, where Engeline was supposed to be safe, she became a ghost. She's quiet, gloomy, often late, and wears dirty, smelly clothes. Her teachers knew something was wrong, but every time they asked, she remained silent, a shield built by fear. Until one day, hunger broke down her defenses, and she admitted that he often felt dizzy at school because he hadn't eaten. Marguerite tried to justify the actions by saying that Engeline was a picky eater, but her teachers knew the truth. They fed her and watched her eat until Engeline finished 2 plates, proof that silenced all lies. She's not a picky eater. She's just a little girl who's hungry, treated like a burden in a house full of animals, and not like a human being. With tired eyes and a mind full of Engelina's suffering, her headmaster, Ketet Ruda, made a decision full of hope. He saw a little girl who was almost lost and intended to save her. The intention was to adopt Engeline, an offer that came straight from the heart, delivered through Engeline's teacher, an offer that could change everything. But Marguerite, who was behind a door filled with darkness, refused him. The reason is simple and brutal. Engeline had responsibilities, duties, and obligations at home. That was a cold, unemotional reason that denied every maternal instinct. She refused Engeline's freedom, not for her happiness, but to keep her as a slave. That's the cold, hard truth behind the decision. And this is the most terrifying lie of all. In public, Marguerite played the role of a grieving mother, a woman who loved her daughter. She insisted she was innocent, firmly denying all charges. She claimed that the tasks she gave her were only to teach her to be independent. Her lawyer even said that Engeline's name, which was taken from the name of Marguerite to mother, was proof of her love. A former neighbor from Peckinbarrow testified that she raised Engeline as her own child. But we know the truth. We know that her compassion, if it ever existed, was just a facade, a cold mask. Because behind all those loving words, there's a threat. When she heard that the National Commission for Child Protection would take Engeline from her, she stated that she would kill anyone who tried to take the child from her. That's the terrible truth, an angry confession that clearly reveals her true nature, a woman who would rather kill than relinquish control. And here's the grim truth about that love. It was a lie, a brittle, disgusting lie that couldn't survive one last burst of temper. The facts, as laid out in the court documents, are as simple and brutal as a hammer to the head. On May 15th, 2015, the facade cracked for good when Marguerite hit the little girl with such force that blood poured from her nose and ears. She didn't feel remorse, she felt a need to clean up her mess. So, she made a plan. The next day, at approximately 12:30 p.m., she took the little girl's life. This wasn't a mistake. It was a cold, deliberate act. The court heard the details, too. The multiple blows to the face, the hair pulled back, the head slammed against the wall. The last words that anyone ever heard from that little girl, a broken plea whispered from a mouth filled with blood, were, "Mom, enough. Mom, let go. Mom." It was a child's last desperate cry for the one person who was supposed to protect her. And all a witness heard was the last faint whisper of "Mom, Mom." When cruelty is no longer hidden. As planned with meticulous care, the truth was revealed in a room that was supposed to be a safe place. Auguste Honda, who was outside, heard a brief call. "Auguste, come here for a moment." He went inside and saw the scene that would haunt him forever. Margaret, with both hands tightly gripping Engeline's hair. The little girl hung limply, her head at the height of the bed, but her feet only just touched the floor. Then, without hesitation, Margaret slammed the little girl's head against the floor. It wasn't an accident. It was a cold and merciless execution carried out in front of a trembling witness. And the silence that followed was a confession louder than any words. This was the real end, in a room that reeked of death. After Engeline fell to the floor, Agus crouched, his hands on the child's neck, as if he might draw her last breath. He asked, "Madam, why did you beat Engeline like this?" But the woman, emotionless, looked at him with a sharp, piercing gaze. And then silence fell over Agus. Engeline's body went limp, her eyes open but blank. Only one thing moved, the middle and ring fingers of her left hand twitching, dancing in the deathly stillness. Agus stood, and Marguerite whispered, "Don't tell anyone that I beat Engeline, and do not reveal this secret. I will give you 200 million rupiah. On the 24th, I will give you the money, and you can go straight back to your home in Sumba Island and never come back again." The offer was cold and cruel, an attempt to cover up, because Agus witnessed the murder. Now we've reached the part where lies and cruelty are brought together. After the money was offered, Marguerite moved immediately, as if she were carrying out a routine task. She told Agus to get the sheets, an item made for comfort and warmth, but now used as a shroud. They both spread the sheet on the floor. Marguerite held one end, and Agus helped open it. Then, with a cold movement, Agus lifted the small, helpless body and laid it on the sheets. Marguerite bent Engeline's legs, as if she were packing a suitcase, not preparing a young girl for a secret burial. It wasn't an act filled with emotion. It was a calculated and brutal act, a cold truth that even money couldn't hide. Once the body was on the sheet, the next part of the job was to tie it up and make it disappear. Marguerite, with a cold efficiency that would make a seasoned criminal proud, told August to go get the rope. He walked to the back room where a pile of ropes was kept. He grabbed a bunch of blue rope and a shorter piece of brown rope and brought them back. But that wasn't enough. Marguerite's mind was already 3 steps ahead. She asked him for his knife, a simple blade with a taped handle. She took it, caught the brown rope, and then, with a gas lighter, she sealed the ends of the blue rope to prevent it from fraying. A gas lighter, a knife, and some rope. Mundane objects that became the tools of a monstrous crime. It was a chilling detail, a clear sign that this wasn't an act of a person who had lost control, but of someone who was executing a plan with brutal, unfeeling precision. A plan to make a little girl vanish without a trace. The act was a grim dance of 2 people in a room filled with dread. Marguerite, with a cold efficiency that would make a seasoned criminal proud, couldn't figure out how to tie the ropes together herself, so she handed the job to Agus. He took the brown rope and the blue rope, and with a simple knot, he made them one. It was a detail so mundane, a task so simple, yet it sealed a little girl's fate. Marguerite's next order was just as cold and straightforward. Tie the rope around her neck. Agus, a man now completely under her spell, did as he was told. He wrapped the combined rope around Engeline's lifeless neck. It wasn't an act of hatred, but an act of obedience, a final, horrifying step in a plan to make a child disappear from the world without a trace. It was a cold, brutal, and utterly heartless final act. After all the plotting, the sheet, the rope, and the wrapped body, the game didn't end. Marguerite ordered Agus to get a doll. Agus took a Barbie doll from a dresser drawer and handed it to her. Marguerite placed the doll on Engeline's chest, like a mother putting her child to bed. But then the evil grew darker. Marguerite stepped on the girl's right foot, then ordered Auguste to take off his shirt and place it on top of the victim's body. Auguste did so, and then, coldly, she asked Auguste to remove the victim's underwear. Auguste did so. Then, Marguerite asked one more thing, the most horrific of all. She asked Auguste to assault the child's corpse. And for the first time in a long series of crimes, Auguste stopped. He refused. He turned and ran out of the room, leaving the monster alone with the corpse. After the act of rejection, Auguste ran to his own room, washing his hands as if he could cleanse himself of the sin he had just witnessed. He returned no longer as a loyal henchman, but as a desperate spectator. He carried his jeans and a red curtain, a fabric that was supposed to adorn windows and provide protection, but instead became part of a greater evil. He put the pants on the little girl's body and tucked the curtain under her back, all at the woman's command. Margaret isn't finished yet. She asked for a cigarette, and when Auguste refused to give him his, she took Augus's still lit cigarette and set it on fire against Engeline's body. It was the most sadistic act, a cold signature. She wanted to ensure there was no turning back, a cruel act that stripped away all remaining vestiges of humanity. Finally, the woman told Auguste to wrap the little girl's entire body, an act to conclude the cruelty she had inflicted, a package ready to be sent into the ground. This act was a grim dance of two people, a worst gardening act. Auguste dug the hole near the chicken coop, a pit for a child who was treated no better than a chicken. He was too slow for her, though. "Auguste, what taking you so long?" she asked, an impatient woman hurrying a man to finish burying a body. The bundle was carried out, a small, sad package, and placed in the hole. But it wasn't enough. With the body in the ground, the grave was still a secret waiting to be found. So Marguerite, with a cold, almost domestic precision, asked Auguste to take a bunch of bamboo, the leftovers from the coop, and put it on top of the grave. Then she asked for a basket, a red one, to be placed beside it. It was a final, chilling touch, a woman trying to turn a fresh grave into an unremarkable part of her backyard, a silent testament to a crime that was now buried but far from gone. After that gruesome spectacle, the tiny body packed and sealed in the ground, Marguerite gave the grave a final touch. She took a handful of chicken feed, threw it onto the freshly dug mound of earth. She tried to cover up a crime that couldn't be covered up, a lie that couldn't be swallowed. And, already fed up with all this madness, Auguste returned to his room, but the woman's voice called him again from the darkness. She told Auguste to pretend to look for Engeline, to ask Mrs. Susiani and Mr. Hendeneau about the child's whereabouts, while she would pretend to ask the neighbors. It was a cold and cruel plan. Not only did she bury the child's body, but she also planned to bury the truth behind a great lie. And the lies began. In the United States, Christina, Engeline's adoptive sister, started a social media campaign asking for help in finding their missing sister. A Facebook page titled Find Engeline, Bali's Missing Child was posted on May 16, 2015. Yvonne, the other sister, made flyers with Engeline's photo. The outside world saw two grieving sisters desperately trying to find their little sister. It was a perfect performance, one that captured the sympathy of thousands. But as we now know, it was a staged act. While the world searched for a missing girl, Marguerite knew where she was, and that made the whole story even more terrifying. As the deception began, the outside world, the media, the police, and the public became caught up in the charade. On May 16, 2015, a Facebook page appeared, a seemingly sincere plea from a grieving older sister. The world was searching for a little girl named Engeline, who had been reported missing while playing outside. Police joined the search, analyzing CCTV, and even bringing in sniffer dogs. But there was one thing they couldn't find: running footprints. The dogs were simply circling the yard, a truth he couldn't fathom, because they weren't looking for a missing person. They were searching for a buried secret, covered by the dirt, and the ghost they sought was right under their noses. People who cared about the fate of a child finally came. The Indonesian National Commission for Child Protection, with its chairman, Arist Merdeka Sirait, came to the house. He saw what we all know: a house filled with filth and stench, unfit for habitation. Arist wanted to take Engeline in, to give her a better life, a decision made with good intentions. But those good intentions were met with tears. Fake tears. Marguerite, who had already played the role of a grieving mother, now played the role of a desperate mother. She wept hysterically, refusing to give up the child. "I will kill whoever takes that child from me," she said. A cold, emotionless promise. She didn't disguise herself with excuses about love or concern. She said it out loud, a terrifying confession coming from a woman who wanted to keep her slave. It wasn't love, it was possession. And that, the most crucial difference. This is the part of the story where all the bad things come to light, and even the most powerful people in the country can't stop it. When the case went viral, two ministers, the Minister of Administrative and Bureaucratic Reform and the Minister of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, came to the house, but the door was slammed shut in their faces. Marguerite, already playing the role of a grieving mother, refused to meet them. She knew something was hidden inside the house, something worse than the filth they all saw outside. There was a secret hidden behind the locked door, a secret no one should see. So she refused, a brave and merciless act. It was a silent admission, more powerful than any words. It was an admission that there was a hidden evil, a lie too big to hide. And when the truth couldn't be found, a community group, the Denpasar City Integrated Service Center for the Empowerment of Women and Children, began to suspect something much darker. They found no footprints, no clues that Engeline had been kidnapped or run away. The clue was inside, a truth confirmed by the manservant himself. Auguste had said that Engeline's nose was bleeding from being hit by her mother the day before she was reported missing. Despite all the lies and dishonesty they faced, the truth began to reveal itself. This wasn't a missing child case. It was a crime. They weren't looking for a lost girl. They were looking for a hidden killer. And the killer was inside the house, covering her tracks with lies. All the searching, all the pleading, all the performances the perpetrators put on ended in that backyard. On June 10, 2015, under a banana tree, an unconcealable stench revealed the location of the grave. They hadn't found the missing girl. They had found a decomposing body, buried among garbage and filth, wrapped in the very cloth that was supposed to protect it. An autopsy revealed the cruel truth. She had been dead for 3 weeks. Her body covered in bruises, cigarette burns, and wounds from the rope that bound her. It wasn't an accident. It was murder, with blunt force trauma to the face and head causing a brain hemorrhage. And in the end, she was buried in her mother's hometown of Banyuwangi. After the body was discovered, the truth began to emerge like smoke from a newly fired gun. Police made arrests, and 7 people were pulled into the bright lights for questioning. There was the grieving foster mother, her 2 daughters, and the people who lived in the house. But among them, there was one confessor, a servant named August Handa. He confessed to killing and raping the girl the same day she was reported missing. At 1 p.m., he said it, a cold, emotionless moment of ending a life. And at 8 p.m., he confessed to burying her behind the house, as if he were planting a tree. And for a moment, the story seemed simple, a single crime committed by an evil man. But you and I know that in cases like this, the truth is often more complex, a secret hidden deep within the house. The story the police were telling was a simple one, and in this business, simple stories are usually lies. They had their man, the servant who confessed to murder and rape. It was a neat, clean package. But on June 14th, 2015, the story changed. Bali police officially named Marguerite as a suspect, not for murder, but for child neglect. It was a small charge for a big crime, a hook to get her into a cell. It was the first step, a small piece of justice that would eventually lead them to the truth. The game ended on June 28, 2015, when the truth finally emerged from all the falsehoods and lies. The police were no longer satisfied with the simple story of a male servant committing murder. They reviewed forensic evidence and autopsy reports that told a more horrific story. And then, with the help of police headquarters, they discovered the truth. Margaret, the grieving adoptive mother, was arrested as a murder suspect. It was not an accident, but a premeditated murder. The servant, August, was now merely an accomplice who helped bury the little body. With a confession, evidence, and all the hidden stories, the case was solved. But that wasn't the end. Her lawyer filed a lawsuit to overturn the suspect's status. It was simply a legal game, a last-ditch effort by a cornered woman to escape the crime she had committed. The legal games continued on July 6, 2015, when the truth was no longer just words on a paper. The police brought the 2 of them back, the mastermind and the accomplice, to the house at Setup Malam Street, Denpasar. They were there to reenact the murder, a grim performance in the very rooms where it happened. They showed every cold, deliberate step, the brutal attack, the wrapping of the body, and the final burial in the backyard. It was a reconstruction that left nothing to the imagination, a final public act of an unspeakable crime. And as the truth was laid bare in that house, a cold shadow fell over the place, a reminder that some stories are not fiction but brutal, terrifying reality. On July 29, 2015, the pretrial motion filed by Marguerite's lawyers landed with a thud in the Denpasar District Court. The judge didn't buy it. He ruled that the defense's argument, claiming the police had no valid evidence to name her a suspect, was baseless. The cold, hard truth of the forensics, the witness testimony, and the crime scene investigation was more powerful than any legal maneuvering. It was a victory for the dead, a final statement from the law that a child's life was worth more than a desperate lie. With the motion denied, the stage was set for the only thing that mattered, the verdict. On September 7, 2015, all the pieces of the puzzle were finally laid out. The police had their case, a thick stack of papers detailing a story no one wanted to believe. The case file was officially closed and handed over to the district attorney's office. It wasn't just about child neglect anymore. The charges against Marguerite told the whole brutal story: premeditated murder, abuse resulting in death, and neglect. The lies had run out of road. The truth was now a matter of public record, a cold, hard document that detailed how a little girl's life was stolen from her. The courtroom doors were about to open, and the monster in the cage was finally going to face the music. The act was a grim performance inside a courtroom on October 22, 2015. The prosecutor, a man who dealt in cold facts and hard truths, laid out the story for all to hear. He said Marguerite had hit the girl, her bare hands a weapon, until blood ran from her nose and ears. It wasn't an accident. It was a prelude to a planned murder, a way to make a problem disappear. The prosecutor detailed how she'd offered the houseboy a bribe to bury the body, how she'd ordered him to burn the girl with a cigarette, a fact confirmed by the coroner's report. With all the evidence in the room, with a dead child's story finally being told, Marguerite stood up and looked the world in the eye. She denied it all. She said she loved Engeline like her own. It was the same old lie, and in that moment, it felt colder and more pointless than ever. The final act was played out in a courtroom, a cold stage where justice was supposed to be served. On February 2, 2016, the prosecutors laid out their final demands. They didn't go after Auguste for murder. They asked for 12 years for letting her die, a small price for watching a child's life go out. But 2 days later, the real target stood in the dock, a woman who had a habit of burying her problems. The prosecutors asked for life. Margaret's lawyer called the demand imaginative, a cynical word for a monster's fate. But on February 29th, the judge didn't let Margaret's imagination save her. The gavel came down, and she was handed a life sentence. On the same day, Auguste received 10 years. It was over. But for the dead child's real mother, it wasn't enough. She said Margaret should have received the death penalty. And on a case as cold and brutal as this one, you'd be hard-pressed to argue with her. The final word from the court wasn't enough for them. With the verdicts in, both Marguerite and Auguste filed appeals, a last-ditch effort to outrun the truth. Marguerite even made a video, a desperate plea from behind bars, pointing a finger at Auguste and claiming he was the real killer. It was one last lie, a final roll of the dice in a game she'd already lost. But the law sometimes has a long memory. In May 2016, the High Court of Bali looked at the evidence, looked at the appeals, and upheld the original verdict. Still not satisfied, they took their case to the highest court, the Supreme Court itself. But the judges there saw the same thing: the hard facts, the brutal reality, and the cold truth that had already been laid out. In February 2017, the final verdict came down. Nothing changed. The case was closed, and with it, the truth about a little girl's death was set in stone. And this is where the story ends. The legal battles were over, the appeals were denied, and the woman who had buried a child was finally out of options. She didn't pay her debt with a bullet or a noose. She paid it in a hospital bed in Badung, slowly over time. On December 6th, 2024, Marguerite, the perpetrator of a brutal crime, drew her last breath, her body worn out by chronic kidney failure and the cold, unfeeling justice of a machine. Her final end wasn't a blaze of glory or a dramatic confession. It was a slow, quiet surrender to this same biological process that ends us all, a fittingly grim conclusion to a life of calculated cruelty. Her story is over, but the one about the little girl buried under the banana tree, that one never will be. The story of Marguerite Megawe is finally over. She paid her debt, not to a judge or a jury, but to a silent, creeping illness that cared nothing for justice or mercy. A quiet death in a hospital bed, a pitiful, pathetic end for a woman who was a monster in the flesh. Her passing closes the book on her life, but it doesn't close the case. The real story isn't about her and the games she played. It's about the little girl who was treated as less than a person, a commodity in a cold transaction, a ghost who was trapped in a home that smelled of chicken waste and neglect. The true warning here is that the most dangerous monsters don't live in the shadows. They live in plain sight, behind a smile and a closed door, and the quiet suffering of a child is often ignored by the very people who claim to love them. And that brings us to the real question. How many other Engelines are out there, living in a personal hell while the world looks the other way? Her story is a chilling reminder to look closer, to listen to the whispers, and to see the things that others pretend not to notice. Because a single act of kindness, a single question asked, could be the one thing that saves a child from a fate like hers. If this story touched you, hit the like button, share this video to spread the word, and subscribe for more true crime stories. And in the comments below, tell us what you think is the biggest lesson from this case.